Hi guys, and welcome to another hands-on lesson. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to set up an AWS site-to-site virtual private network, a VPN. So this is going to be the topology that we create. We have a VPC, and then we have an on-premises data center. Now, of course, we don't actually have an on-premises data center. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our second account to simulate the on-premises data center. So we have two accounts set up for this course. One is our management account and one is our production account. We're going to use the production account for the on-premises DC. We're going to use the management account for the AWS VPC. We then deploy an EC2 instance into the on-premises DC, and that's going to run a service called OpenSwan, which is an implementation of the IPsec protocol. And the AWS VPN is an IPsec-based VPN. It's the protocol it uses for securing the channel and encrypting the data. So the OpenSwan is essentially going to be the customer gateway. We then have the virtual private gateway on the AWS side. And once we've got those two pieces, we can establish an encrypted virtual private network connection between the two data centers. And this will use the public internet because we're going to be using public endpoints for both the VGW and the OpenSwan customer gateway. We'll then need to update our route tables. So the route table in the AWS VPC will have a propagation turned on for the virtual gateway. That means the routes that are advertised via the virtual gateway will be propagated into the route table. On the on-premises DC side, what we're going to do is add an entry, and it's going to point towards the IP CIDR block of the AWS VPC, and it's going to have a target of the instance ID of the OpenSwan customer gateway. We're then going to launch a couple of instances into our respective sites, and we're going to have an internal server on the on-premises DC side and an EC2 instance on the other side. Of course, they'll both really be EC2 instances. And what we want to do is we're going to try and send a ping request from the internal server, and it's going to use the route table entry and send the data to the OpenSwan customer gateway, and that's going to send it over the encrypted connection to the EC2 instance, and this will be using the private IP address of the EC2 instance. So that's what we're going to do. Let's go and set it up. Now, by the way, I do have some instructions which I'm going to share with you, and they're on this page here. And I'm going to show you every step of the process. You've got to be careful to make sure you follow through carefully. It's not a difficult thing to set up, but if you miss any of these steps, it won't work. So make sure you follow along carefully, and then you can use this as a reference point as well. So the first thing is we're going to go to our on-premises VPC, which remember is our production account, and launch an EC2 instance. And we have a few parameters here. We need to disable source destination checks. That means that we are able to route via the actual EC2 instance because it's not going to check the IP addresses that are coming in and going out. Now, if you don't have that disabled, you can't use IP forwarding with an EC2 instance. We're going to put it in a public subnet so that we can SSH straight into it. And so we need the port 22 open, and we need ICMP all as well so that we can ping both from the AWS VPC to this instance across the VPN, and we want to be able to send the other way as well, which will be the security group on the other side. Once we've done that, we'll take a note of the public IP, come back to the management account and start setting up some stuff there. So let's go and do step one first. I'm in EC2, but at the moment I'm on my management account. So I'm going to switch to my other account, my production account. We're going to launch an instance, Linux 2 AMI, T2 micro. Now let's launch two because one will be our OpenSwan server, the other will be that server we're going to use for testing. So I want to make sure I've got the right VPC selected, and in this case I have, and I've labeled my VPC so it says on-premises DC just to make it a bit clearer. I'm going to put them into one subnet here, US East 1A, and you've noticed I'm using North Virginia. So I'm using North Virginia for both sides of the connection, and that just makes it easier flicking between consoles. Also, if you left your VPC peering connection up with Ohio, then we don't want to use that one because we'll have to take down that connection first. So I've got my on-premises DC selected, a public subnet, I've got two instances, and that's all I need to set up. Let's go through. I want to make sure I have a security group that allows SSH port 22 from anywhere, and ICMP v4 using the IP anywhere as well for IPv4. So make sure you have a security group allowing those two things. If you don't, then just create one. And then let's go and launch those instances. So those are launching. Now let's give one of them the name OpenSwan so we know what it is. And let's just call the other one server and click on save. So what we want now is for the OpenSwan server, go up to Actions, Networking, change source destination check, and we want to click on stop. So you have to do this if the instance is going to be forwarding connections. So let's click on save. And now we're going to copy the public. Now let's switch back to our other account, so our management account, which is going to be the AWS side of this connection. And while we're in EC2, let's launch the instance that we're going to use for testing on this side. Again, just the same settings as always. I'm going to put this one into my custom VPC. So I've labeled this now AWS VPC. This is the one we created earlier in the course. That should have the 10.0.0.0/16 CIDR block. I'm going to put this one in a public subnet. Doesn't matter too much unless we want to connect in and actually use it for testing from that side of the connection. Let's go through again to security group. I'm going to choose web access, and again we have SSH and we have ICMP IPv4 all from any source address. So that's great, that's all I need. Let's launch this instance. Let's go to the VPC management console now, and we're going to start setting up the connection. So we scroll down to virtual private network. First thing we'll do is create the customer gateway. Create customer gateway. I'm going to put in the IP address that I copied to my clipboard. So this is the public IP address of the EC2 instance we launched in the production account, the one we labeled OpenSwan. I'm going to give the customer gateway a name, and we don't need to specify any other settings. Make sure routing's on static and create customer gateway. So that's done. The next is to create a virtual private gateway. So we create virtual private gateway, give it a name tag, and then create the virtual private gateway. Close here, and then what we need to do is attach it to a VPC. So we go to Actions, Attach to VPC, select our AWS VPC, and attach. That's in an attaching state. And the last thing to do is go to site-to-site VPN connections and create the connection. We'll give it a name. The target should be a virtual private gateway. If we select in the box here, we can see the gateway we just created. Then we're going to use an existing customer gateway. Again, select the entry there. Change routing to static. And for prefixes, there's two prefixes we need to add. The 172.31.0.0.16 is from the customer side of the connection, and then the 10.0.0.0/16 is from the AWS VPC side. Now we need to give it the local IPv4 network CIDR. This is the customer gateway side. So that's going to be that 172.31 block. The remote network, that's actually the AWS side. So we can copy that down there. And that's those two set up. So let's now create this VPN connection. Close out of there, and that's in a pending state. Now, while that's happening, what I'm going to do is go up to route tables, and we need to enable route propagation. I'm going to choose my main route table. This is the route table associated with the AWS VPC. Choose route propagation, edit, and then select propagate. And this is the virtual private gateway here. So we're now going to propagate the routes from the virtual private gateway. Let's click on save. With that done, we can come back down to site-to-site VPN connections. Let's give this a refresh. Still in a pending state, but let's try and download the configuration. We want to choose OpenSwan. So just scroll down to OpenSwan, click on download. That should give you a file that looks very much like this. Now, if it doesn't, it might tell you that it's not ready to generate it and there won't be anything in there. In that case, just wait and try it again a few minutes later. But what you should see is this. And what we're going to do now is if you scroll down to IPsec tunnel 1, we're just going to configure tunnel 1, not tunnel 2. So there's a few instructions here. You'll see these as well in the document in the course download. So these are configurations that we need to apply to the OpenSwan server. That's the one running the IPsec protocol. It's our customer gateway on the production side of the connection. So let's go and SSH into that server. So I've established a connection to my EC2 instance. So again, this is the OpenSwan server in our production DC, which is our on-premises DC that we're simulating. And now let's go and grab some of those commands and start entering the commands. The first one we need to do is open this file here and enter this information. So let's copy this to our clipboard, come back. I'm going to use the nano utility. In fact, before I do that, I've got to switch to root, then use nano to edit the file. Just bring the cursor down underneath this text, and then we need to copy this information here. Paste that in. Let's save those entries, and now come back, and to apply those changes, we can run this command. So let's put this in, and we can see that the information has been applied. Now, we don't need to do step 2 because I'm sure that this line is already uncommented. Step 4 is to add this information to this file here, the etc ipsecd AWS conf. But before we do that, we have to install OpenSwan. So coming back to my file here, and you can see I've got these steps in here. So this is the command we need to run, yum install OpenSwan-y. So let's paste that in, and that will install OpenSwan. Now we've already done this next piece here, so we can come down now to this line here where we're nanoing and we're editing this AWS conf file. So we open this file, and you can see it doesn't already exist, so it's empty. Now, the easiest way to get the information to put into here is back on the text file that you downloaded, the configuration file. So this is the information. Now, a couple of things. This line here, auth equals ESP. We've got to remove that. Take that out. It's really important you do that. Then the left subnet, this is the local network behind your OpenSwan server. So that's 172.31.0.0/16. The remote network is the 10.0.0.0/16. That's the AWS side. Now this has pre-populated the other information, so we've got these IP addresses here already. So we can now copy all of this, paste it in, save the file, and then let's see what the next one is. So the next file, and again, you need to pull this information out of this text file because this is the up-to-date information. We need to edit this secrets file. So let's come back, use nano, and then we need to copy this line here from the first IP address. So these are the IP address endpoints for our two sides of the connection, and then this is the pre-shared key that's being used for authentication. So we just put that whole line in and then save the file. So back in this instructions file, we've just added this information here. We've just added the line to the secrets file, and now we can start IPsec. So let's run the command to start IPsec. Looks like it started, but we can come back and run this command to check the status. And that looks like it's active and running. So things are good there. Now let's go over to the console and see what we've got there. Hopefully we've got a connection which is running. We should have tunnel 1 which is up rather than down. Back in the management account, this is our VPN connection. Let's go to tunnel details, and we can see tunnel 1 is up. So we only configured one tunnel, so that looks good. Now, if it still says down, then just give it a minute, give it at least a couple of minutes, and keep refreshing, because sometimes it does take a while to show that it's up. Now, if that doesn't happen still, go back and check every step, because something along the way has not been executed correctly, so you might have some configuration problem that you need to resolve. But this one is up, and what I want to do now is let's go back to EC2, and I'm going to go and copy the IP address. So this is the IP address, the private IP address of our instance on the AWS VPC. Let's try and ping that address, and we get a good response. So back in our diagram, what we've done, we've set up the OpenSwan server, the virtual private gateway, the custom gateway, which is a logical object we create here in the VPC, but it corresponds to the actual EC2 instance here. Then we've established a VPN connection. We've updated the route propagation, and what we're going to do is add an entry to the route table so we can ping from our internal server. But what we just did was ping from the OpenSwan instance itself, and we were able to ping this EC2 instance using its private IP address. So that tells us it's definitely going over the VPN connection. So the final test is we're going to add an entry to our route table in the on-premises DC, and then we're going to SSH into the internal server and see if we can ping from there to the EC2 instance, which will mean it's using the route table entry, it's pointing to the OpenSwan server, and then it's sending it on to the EC2 instance. So back in the console here, what I'm going to do is switch accounts again. Let's go to route tables. We've only got one. Go to routes, edit routes, and we're going to add a route, and this is going to be for the 10.0.0/16 network, and it's going to go to an EC2 instance. So we've got instance here, let's choose instance, and it will find our instances, and the route should point towards the OpenSwan server. Let's save that route. That's great. Now let's go to EC2, get the IP address, and connect in. So back in EC2, I'm going to connect to my server, so I need its public IP address for the SSH connection, and then I'm going to go to a command prompt and connect via SSH. I'm on the command prompt now, and as you can see, I'm logged into a different instance. This one is the server, the on-premises server that we're simulating, and so what I'm going to do is try and ping the IP of the instance that's in the AWS VPC. So let's ping that one, and I get a response. So that's great. So that's it, guys. We've completed this lab successfully. We've been able to send a ping request from our internal server. It's used this route table entry to point to the instance ID of the OpenSwan server, which is functioning as our customer gateway. And then there's an established VPN connection through to the AWS side. And it's been able to ping this instance here. So that's all of it. Now let's just go and remove the configuration. Of course, if you want to, you can play around a bit more and work with this configuration. If you wanted to as well, you could set up two-way routing so that you can configure this server to be able to forward on requests that come from this side. So then you could have multiple instances running in either side of the connection, and you'd have full routing between them in both directions. We're not going to do that for now. What I'm going to do is show you how to pull down this configuration to make sure you don't spend any money. So back in my production account, let's just terminate these two instances, and that's all we need to do there. But you might also want to go into your route table and just pull out this route, because this is now a redundant route. So I'll pull that out, and let's go back to the main account now. And on this side, we also have an instance to terminate. So let's terminate that instance. We also have a route table with route propagation, but that actually gets removed for you automatically, so you don't need to make any changes there. Let's just come down to the site-to-site VPN connection. You have to delete this in this order. So we need to delete this connection first. Then we can go in and delete the customer gateway and the virtual private gateway. Now with the virtual private gateway, what happens is you detach it from the VPC first. That's step one. And then you go in and delete the virtual private gateway. So that's all for this lesson. I hope you really enjoyed that hands-on lab, and I'll see you in the next lesson.